They tested Genghis Khan's DNA, and there was nothing. No sample, no remains, no verified trace of the man himself. The most powerful conqueror in history, the man who once controlled more land than any ruler before or since, left behind no body to examine, no tomb to open, no bones to test, nothing. And yet, his bloodline is everywhere. Millions of men alive today carry his genes. Scientists have mapped it, traced it across continents, confirmed it through thousands of DNA samples stretching from Korea to Persia. He is simultaneously the most genetically present man in history and the most physically absent. How does that happen? How can the most powerful man in history leave no trace behind? His name was Temujin, born somewhere on the steppes of Mongolia in a world of warring tribes and brutal winters around 1162 AD. He would go on to unite those tribes, to forge them into something the world had never seen and has never seen since: the Mongol Empire. At its peak, it covered over 24 million square kilometers, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, from Siberia to the Persian Gulf, the largest contiguous empire in human history. He conquered China, Persia, Russia, Central Asia. He reshaped borders that still exist today. He redirected the flow of trade, religion, and civilization itself. His name became a title, Genghis Khan, universal ruler, and then he died, and he simply vanished. Here is where the mystery begins. Genghis Khan is estimated to have fathered hundreds of children. His sons and grandsons continued conquering for generations. His bloodline spread across the known world with the same relentless force as his armies. Genetic studies have identified a Y chromosome lineage, passed only from father to son, that appears in roughly 16 million men today. A single male ancestor living approximately 1,000 years ago, somewhere in Mongolia. The math is staggering. 1 in 200 men on Earth may carry his genetic signature. He is, in terms of raw reproductive impact, the most genetically successful individual in recorded human history, everywhere. And yet the man himself, the source of all of it, is nowhere. No confirmed burial site, no bones, no coffin, no artifacts positively linked to his remains, not a single biological sample that scientists can say, with certainty, came from Genghis Khan. Everywhere and nowhere. The man who left the largest genetic footprint in human history has left no physical footprint at all. He died in 1227. The exact cause is debated. Some say a fall from a horse. Others suggest illness, or a wound that never healed. The precise circumstances were never recorded. Or, if they were, those records were destroyed. What we know is this: his body had to travel. He died far from his homeland in northwest China during a military campaign. His remains needed to make a long journey back across the steppe to Mongolia, and this is where the stories become dark. According to the accounts that survive, his funeral procession crossed hundreds of miles of open land. But no one who witnessed that procession was allowed to live. Soldiers traveling with the body reportedly killed every person they encountered along the route: witnesses, travelers, villagers, anyone who might remember which direction the procession moved, or where it stopped, or how long it traveled. Some accounts say the soldiers themselves were killed afterward. The circle of knowledge was collapsed, deliberately, violently, until it contained almost no one. The burial location, wherever it was chosen for secrecy, not ceremony. No monument was erected, no marker placed. Some accounts suggest trees were planted over the site, or rivers were diverted to cover the grave entirely. One tradition holds that 1,000 horses rode over the burial ground, churning the earth until no disturbance remained visible. Then the horses were killed. Then the men who killed the horses were killed, until there was no one left who knew. The greatest man in the world was buried like a secret. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell over the steppe. Mongolia changed hands. The Soviet Union sealed the region from outside research for decades. When scientists finally turned their attention to the question, they found something extraordinary and something deeply frustrating. On one hand, the genetic evidence was overwhelming. That Y chromosome lineage, the one shared by an estimated 16 million men, pointed unmistakably toward a single ancestor in medieval Mongolia. The timeline matched, the geography matched, the historical record matched. The science was saying he was real and his bloodline is everywhere. But when researchers tried to close the loop, to find his actual remains and test them directly, they hit a wall. No tomb has ever been confirmed. Satellite imaging has scanned the Mongolian steppe for anomalies. Archaeologists have excavated sites believed to be near his birthplace. An international project spent years using non-invasive imaging across thousands of square kilometers of terrain. They found burial sites, ancient ones, some of them important, none confirmed as Genghis Khan. Without a verified DNA sample from the man himself, the genetic studies remain exactly that. Studies of a lineage, not confirmation of the source. Science can say a man existed who fits the profile. It cannot say, this is him. The most studied genetic legacy in history has no anchor point. Stop and think about what that actually means. We can sequence the DNA of Egyptian pharaohs dead for 3,000 years. We have confirmed genetic material from medieval European kings. We have tested ancient remains across nearly every major civilization on Earth. But Genghis Khan, who died less than 800 years ago, remains beyond reach. Not because the science is insufficient. Because there is nothing to test, no verified remains, no confirmed tomb, no physical object definitively tied to his body. Every genetic study about his lineage is built on inference, on population modeling, on the statistical likelihood that so many similar Y chromosomes converging in one region must trace back to one man at one moment in time. The conclusion is almost certainly correct, but almost certainly is not the same as confirmed. The most genetically influential man in human history has no genetic reference sample. That is not a gap in the record, that is the record. So, where is he? The simplest possibility? His tomb still exists, somewhere in Mongolia, and we haven't found it yet. The Mongolian steppe is vast, the terrain is remote, the soil conditions vary enormously. It is entirely possible that a burial site has survived, undisturbed, for 8 centuries, and that we simply haven't looked in the right place with the right tools. But a second possibility is harder to dismiss. Some historians argue the concealment was too deliberate, too total to have been left to chance. The killing of witnesses, the obliteration of the root, the absence of any structure or monument. This was not the burial of a man who expected to be found. This was an act of erasure. If that erasure was thorough enough, if the site was never marked, never documented, and the people who knew were systematically removed, then the tomb may be unfindable not because we haven't searched hard enough, but because it was designed to be unfindable. There is a third possibility. Even if the tomb is discovered, it may contain nothing useful. 8 centuries of soil acidity, water exposure, and environmental decay can destroy organic material entirely. DNA degrades. Bone deteriorates. In the wrong conditions, even a confirmed burial site yields nothing a laboratory can use. The body may be there, the DNA may be gone. And a fourth theory, quieter but persistent, suggests that the historical record itself was shaped by people who had reasons to control the story, that certain details were not lost accidentally, but guided away from inquiry, that the erasure of Genghis Khan's physical presence from history was not just a Mongol funeral custom, but a deliberate political act carried forward by generations who understood that controlling the tomb meant controlling the legacy. None of these theories can be proven, none of them can be ruled out, and that is the point. There is something almost deliberate about all of this. Genghis Khan spent his life imposing his will on the world. He decided who lived and who died. He decided which cities stood and which were erased from the map. He moved populations like pieces on a board. Is it possible that he made one final decision? That he looked at the civilizations he had studied, the dynasties that crumbled when enemies desecrated their sacred tombs, the rulers whose graves became targets, whose resting places became battlegrounds, and chose differently. Mongol tradition had long held that the dead should return to the earth quietly, that a marked grave invited disturbance, that true power did not require a monument. Maybe the disappearance was not a failure of history. Maybe it was the last act of a man who understood power better than anyone alive. He had watched empires collapse under the weight of their own symbols. He built no temples. He built no palaces for himself. He lived in a tent until the end, and he was buried as he lived, without ceremony, without permanence, without anything left behind for enemies or followers, or centuries of curious strangers to find and use and reinterpret. The man who reshaped the world may have erased himself from it on purpose. That is either the most humble act in the history of conquerors, or the most calculated. We can trace his descendants across 20 modern nations. We can walk the roads his armies traveled, stand in the ruins of cities he destroyed, read the records of kingdoms that fell to his name. We can map his empire down to the kilometer, but we cannot find him. 8 centuries after his death, the greatest military mind in human history remains exactly where he chose to be. Nowhere. No tomb to visit, no bones to examine, no verified DNA to sequence, no confirmation, and no closure. Just a genetic echo spreading across the planet, growing more dilute with every generation. A signal without a source, a legacy without a body, a name carved into the history of the entire world, attached to a man who left nothing behind to find. The greatest conqueror in history didn't just disappear. He left nothing behind to find.